Hello, everyone. I'm writing this because I have nowhere else to turn, and I feel like I'm slowly losing my mind. My friends think I'm crazy, and my girlfriend, Sarah, thinks I'm just stressed out over my grandmother's death. Maybe they're right. God, I desperately hope they're right. But what I'm seeing feels completely real, and with every passing minute, I get more and more terrified. We buried my grandmother, Eleanor, 3 weeks ago. She was the last of her generation, the matriarch who held our family together, and her death felt like the end of an era. She left behind an old house in a Connecticut suburb, a 2-story Victorian that always smelled of mothballs, old wood, and something sweet, like cinnamon. A house that always felt alive to me, with its own sighs and creaks. Since my parents were out of state handling some inheritance matters and I work remotely, I volunteered to start clearing out her things. I'd always loved that house, even if it was a little creepy, and it felt right to do this myself, to say goodbye to the place on my own terms. The first few days were uneventful. I methodically went through boxes of clothes, dishes, and all the junk she'd accumulated over decades. During the day, the house was just old and quiet, but at night, it changed. Every creak of a floorboard upstairs made me jump. Every gust of wind rattling a branch against the window sounded like a persistent rap of knuckles. I chalked it up to my nerves. The attic was the final frontier. It was packed to the gills with chests and cardboard boxes covered in a thick layer of dust that danced in the single beam of light from a dormer window. The air was stale, smelling of old paper and bygone times. And it was there, at the bottom of a heavy cedar chest, that I found it. The photograph. It was in a wooden cigar box, along with yellowed letters written in faded ink and a pair of my great-grandfather's tarnished war medals. It was a family portrait, taken sometime in the early 1920s, I guessed. The photo was sepia-toned, the image had faded slightly over time, and the edges were cracked. It captured 5 people, frozen in time. Seated in the center were my great-grandmother and great-grandfather, Mary and Jonathan. He was a stern man with a thick mustache and a cold, commanding gaze fixed directly on the lens. He wore a stiff suit and looked like he was about to pass judgment on you. She was a thin woman with her hair pulled back tightly, her hands folded primly in her lap, a hidden sadness in her eyes. Standing behind them were their children. On the left was Thomas, the eldest son, a teenager of about 16 with the same severe expression as his father. On the right was a little girl, my grandmother Eleanor, looking no older than 6. And standing between them was their middle daughter, Clara. I had never known much about Clara. The family rarely spoke of her, as if her existence was some inconvenient secret. In the photo, she was about 10, and the sight of her sent a chill down my spine. Unlike the others, whose faces showed at least some emotion, even if it was just forced seriousness, her face was completely blank. Just 2 dark eyes staring somewhere through the camera, through time, through me. I took a picture of the portrait with my phone to send to my mom, then brought the photograph itself, in its heavy, ornate brass frame, downstairs and placed it on the mantelpiece in the living room. It felt right to return them to a place of honor in the house where they once lived. Then I went back to work in the attic. Several hours passed. As dusk began to fall and the shadows in the house grew longer and darker, I went down to the kitchen to make some coffee. Walking through the living room, I glanced at the fireplace. And I froze. Something seemed off. Something subtly wrong. I walked closer and picked up the photograph, the cold metal of the frame chilling my fingers. I could have sworn that great-grandfather Jonathan had been looking straight ahead. Now, his gaze was shifted ever so slightly to the right, toward his wife, Mary. I shook my head. "You're just tired," I told myself. "Bad lighting." I put the frame back and went to the kitchen, cursing my overactive imagination. But the feeling of unease wouldn't leave. After making coffee, I sat on the old couch, upholstered in a faded floral pattern, and tried to distract myself by scrolling through my phone. But I couldn't shake the nasty, prickly feeling that I was being watched. I looked up at the photograph, and my heart skipped a beat. Little Eleanor, my grandmother, had been holding a doll in the picture. I remembered it clearly. I had even zoomed in on the photo on my phone when I sent it to my mom to see the details. It was a simple, faceless rag doll. Now, her hands were empty. They were just folded one over the other on her stomach. The doll was gone. Panic washed over me. With trembling hands, I opened my phone's gallery again. I found the picture I had taken a few hours earlier. I zoomed in. There it was, the doll, clutched in the little girl's hands. I looked back at the physical photograph on the mantel. Empty hands. The pictures were no longer identical. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. My first thought was to get rid of it. Throw it out, burn it, smash it to smithereens. But I couldn't. This was my family. And worse, a morbid, twisted curiosity had paralyzed me. I couldn't look away. I stood in the middle of the dimly lit living room, staring at the portrait of my long-dead relatives. And as I watched, I thought I saw the lips of the eldest son, Thomas, twitch almost imperceptibly into a sinister, all-knowing smirk. Has anyone ever experienced anything like this? Is it just a trick of light and imagination fueled by stress? Or am I slowly going insane in this old, empty house? What should I do? Thank you to everyone who responded last time. Some of you suggested I see a doctor, others told me to burn the photograph, and a few even suggested it was some complex chemical process of an old photo emulsion fading. I appreciate all your advice, I really do. But last night, things got much, much worse. After I wrote my first post, I was on edge. Thomas's smirk was burned into my mind. I grabbed the photograph, intending to take it out to the garage or even outside, just to get it out of the house. But when I picked it up, the frame felt ice-cold, and the glass seemed to be fogged over with a light haze, as if someone had breathed on it from the inside. I dropped it with a loud clatter on the floor. The glass didn't break. In the silence of the house, the sound was like a gunshot. I left it lying face down on the rug and went upstairs to my grandmother's bedroom, where I was staying. I decided I needed proof. Either I was crazy and I needed to see it, or something real was happening, and I needed to document it even more. I went back downstairs, trying not to look at the overturned photograph, grabbed my laptop, and set it up on a bookshelf opposite the fireplace. I put the frame back in its place, aimed the webcam at it, and started recording. Of course, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake all night, listening to the groans of the old house. I thought I heard footsteps in the hallway, a quiet whisper coming from the living room. I was sure it was just my imagination, fueled by fear. But that didn't make it any easier. In the morning, as soon as it was light, I went downstairs. The living room was cold, much colder than the rest of the house. I sat down at my laptop, my heart pounding so hard in my chest it echoed in my ears. I started reviewing the recording. Hour after hour on fast forward. Nothing. Just the photograph on the mantelpiece. Sunlight gave way to darkness, then light again. I was already starting to feel like a complete idiot. I was scrolling through the footage when Sarah sent me a message asking how I was doing. I wrote back that everything was fine, I was just tired. I couldn't tell her about this. Not again. And then I saw it. Around 3:17 a.m. Something flickered on the screen. I rewound and played it back at normal speed. The quality wasn't great, the image was grainy, but what I saw made my blood run cold. It was my great-grandmother, Mary. In the original photograph, her head was tilted slightly toward her husband. On the recording, over a period of about 20 minutes, her head slowly, almost imperceptibly turned. Jerk by jerk, like in stop motion. It turned until she was looking directly into the camera. Directly at me. But that wasn't all. Her right hand, which had been resting peacefully on her knee, had also moved. Her fingers slowly uncurled, and her index finger rose, pointing somewhere off to the side of the photograph. Into my room. I felt sick. I gripped the table to keep from falling. I rewatched that segment a dozen times, trying to find a logical explanation. A trick of the shadows? A camera defect? But the movement was too clear, too deliberate. Shaking, I walked over to the fireplace and looked at the photograph. Yes. Mary's head was turned. Her eyes, which had once seemed sad, now stared at me with a kind of silent reproach. And her finger was pointing into the empty air. I looked at all 5 of them again. Jonathan was still looking at his wife, but now there was something like approval in his gaze. Thomas's smirk had widened, becoming more blatant. My grandmother, Eleanor, with her empty hands, seemed to have shrunk, as if in fear. And then I looked at Clara. The blank face. The dark eyes. But she had changed. I can't say exactly how. It was almost imperceptible, but I felt it with my entire being. She had gotten closer. As if she had taken a tiny, impossible step forward, separating herself from the background. And I thought I saw, for a split second, something alive flicker in the depths of her empty eyes. Something gloating. I can't stay here anymore. I saved that clip of the video to my phone. I don't know what to do next. Burn it? But what if that makes them angry? What if they're not in the photograph, but just looking through it? I'm trapped in this house, and I feel like they're waiting for something. And most of all, I'm terrified of Clara. I'm writing this from a cheap motel 20 miles from the house. I ran. Or rather, I tried to run. After I saw Mary's pointing finger, I knew I had to get out. I threw my laptop in my bag, grabbed my car keys and the photograph. Yes, I know how much of an idiot I must seem. Why did I take it with me? Partly because I needed proof that I wasn't crazy. But the main reason was far more irrational and primal. I was afraid to leave it behind. Afraid that if I let it out of my sight, something even worse would happen. I was already at the door when I stopped. The finger. Where was it pointing? I hate myself for what I did next, but I couldn't leave without knowing. I went back into the living room and placed the photograph back on the mantelpiece. I stood so that my line of sight matched Mary's, and I followed the direction of her finger. It was pointing to a section of the wall next to the bookshelf, covered in faded floral wallpaper. At first I saw nothing. Just old wallpaper. But when I ran my hand over it, I felt a void. The section of the wall under the wallpaper wasn't as solid as the rest. My heart started beating faster. I peeled back a corner of the wallpaper with my fingernail, and it came away with a dry crackle, revealing a small square of dark wood that was almost invisible against the rest of the wall. A hidden door. No handle, no lock. I pushed, and it gave way, opening into a small, cobweb-filled niche in the wall. And inside, on a dusty shelf, lay the doll. The rag doll. Faceless, with a body of faded burlap and buttons sewn on for eyes. It was an exact replica of the one my grandmother was holding in the original photograph. I reached out and touched it. The fabric was cold and unpleasantly damp. It smelled of moist earth and decay. I pulled it out into the light, and then I heard a faint sound behind me. A scrape. I spun around. The photograph. It was still on the mantel. But now there was something terribly wrong with it. I moved closer, and my breath caught in my throat. The space where Clara had been standing was empty. She was just gone. The background behind her, a blurry wallpaper pattern, was clearly visible. She had vanished. But that wasn't the scariest part. The scariest part was the reaction of the others. Their frozen poses were broken. Great-grandfather Jonathan was no longer looking at his wife. He was staring in horror at the empty space where his daughter had just been. Thomas's smirk was gone, replaced by a grimace of pure fear. Great-grandmother Mary had lowered her hand, her face contorted in panic. And little Eleanor, my grandmother, was covering her face with her hands. They weren't just posing. They were reacting. They weren't afraid of me. They were afraid that Clara was gone. And then I heard it. From upstairs. From the second floor. The soft, barely audible sound of small, bare feet padding across old wood. And then laughter. A quiet, melodic child's laugh that sent a wave of ice through my veins. She's not in the photograph anymore. She's in the house. With me. I bolted from the house like I'd been scalded, not remembering how I got in the car and started it. I just drove until the gas ran low. The photograph is lying on the seat next to me. I'm looking at it now. They are all still in a panic. And Clara's spot is still empty. I'm locked in this motel room. I don't know what to do. I think I let her out. What will she do now that she's free? And what am I supposed to do with a photograph of a family staring at me in terror from their frame? It's been 2 days since I fled to this motel. 2 days of paranoia fueled by cheap coffee and a complete lack of sleep. The room smells of stale air and lemon-scented cleaner, but I still feel like I can smell the damp earth that came off that doll. The photograph is on the nightstand, propped against the lamp. I can't bring myself to put it away, but I can't bear to look at it for more than a few seconds at a time. They've changed again. Their panic has turned into a silent, desperate warning. They are no longer looking at the empty space where Clara was. Now, all 4 of them are staring directly at me. Their faded eyes seem to bore into me through the century-old glass. Great-grandfather Jonathan, that stern, domineering man, now looks broken. His mouth is slightly open, as if he's trying to say something but can't make a sound. Great-grandmother Mary is pressing her hands to her chest. My grandmother Eleanor is no longer covering her face. She's looking at me pleadingly, and a dark, motionless tear is rolling down her sepia-toned cheek. But the most terrifying one is Thomas. His face is contorted. He's no longer afraid. He's furious. He's pointing a finger. Not just into the room, but at something specific. At the door. Every time footsteps sound in the hallway outside, I flinch. Every time the air conditioner rumbles to life, my heart sinks. I've drawn the curtains and barricaded the door with a chair, like in a bad movie. But I know it's useless. I can feel her presence. It's cold and heavy, like a slab pressing on my chest. Last night, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know something. I had to hear the voice of a rational person, even if that person decided I'd finally lost my mind. I called my mom. "Hey, Mom. How's it going?" I started, trying to keep my voice steady. "Jake? Honey, is everything okay? You sound awful." I forced a laugh. "Yeah, just tired. Sorting through all this stuff." "Listen, Mom, I have a weird question." I could hear her sigh on the other end. "If it's about whether you should throw out her collection of porcelain cats, then yes, you definitely should." "No, not that. I found an old photograph. Great-grandma, great-grandpa, and their kids." There was a pause. A long, tense one. "Oh, that one," she finally said. Her voice had changed, becoming quieter, more guarded. "Yeah. There's a girl in it. Clara. I don't know anything about her. What happened to her?" "Oh, Jake. That's an old story. A very sad one. She died when she was a child. An illness. Scarlet fever, I think. It was a terrible time." Her words sounded rehearsed, like she'd repeated them many times. "Are you sure?" I pressed. "It's just, she looks so strange in the photo. Blank. People were different back then, sweetie. Having a photograph taken was a serious event." Nobody smiled. She clearly wanted to change the subject. "Mom, please," I begged, my voice cracking. "Something is wrong with this house. With this photograph. I have to know the truth about her." And then she broke. I heard a quiet sob. "We never should have left you there alone," she whispered. "Your grandmother, she was afraid. She was afraid of that photograph. She kept it in the attic so she wouldn't have to see it." "Afraid? Why?" "Clara wasn't just sick, Jake. There was something wrong with her. From the day she was born. She was cruel. Small things at first. Torturing animals, breaking other children's toys. But then it got worse. When she was 9, a neighbor boy fell down a well and broke his leg. He said Clara pushed him. Of course, no one believed him. But your great-grandmother knew. She saw Clara smiling afterward." My fingers tightened around the phone. I glanced at the photograph. At the empty face of the 10-year-old girl. They took her to doctors, to priests. Nothing helped. She got cleverer, meaner. That picture was taken a week before she died. My great-grandfather insisted. He wanted to have at least one normal family portrait. But look at their faces, Jake. They're not posing. They're terrified. They're afraid of the girl standing between them. How did she die, Mom? It wasn't scarlet fever, was it? No. My mother's voice was barely a whisper. She fell down the stairs on the second floor. At night. No one knows how. The doctor called it an accident. But your grandmother Eleanor once confessed to me that on that night, she saw Thomas coming out of Clara's room. He just stood in the hallway and looked down at her body. And on his face, there was relief. A cold sweat washed over me. Thomas. With his vicious smirk, and now his furious, warning glare. He wasn't just posing. He was her jailer. And the others were too. They were all her jailers, locked with her in this two-dimensional prison. And I had failed them. I had opened the door. Mom, I took the photograph with me. I breathed out. What? Why, Jake? Take it back. Put it back in the house, where it belongs. Her voice broke into a scream. It's too late. She's disappeared from the photo. Clara. She's not there anymore. Silence fell on the other end. Only quiet, ragged breathing. And in that moment, as I listened to the silence on the line, I caught a movement out of the corner of my eye. I looked at the photograph on the nightstand. Thomas. He was no longer pointing at the door. He was desperately shaking his head, and his finger was now aimed in a different direction. He was pointing at the dark screen of the television in the corner of my room. I slowly lowered the phone. My own reflection stared back at me dimly from the screen. Behind me, over my shoulder, a small, dark figure stood in the blurry reflection of the room. The figure of a little girl in an old-fashioned dress. I hadn't escaped. I had brought her with me. And then, from my phone speaker, came not my mother's voice, but a quiet, melodic child's laugh. I dropped the phone. It hit the thin carpet with a dull thud. The laughter cut off. I spun around, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. No one. The room was empty. The chair was still propped against the door. The curtains were drawn tight, shutting out the world. The old bed, the nightstand with the photograph, the dark maw of the television. And silence. A thick, oppressive silence that was worse than any scream. I took a few ragged breaths, trying to calm down. A hallucination. Stress, lack of sleep, my mother's story. My brain was just playing cruel tricks on me. There had to be a limit. She couldn't be here, in this anonymous motel room. With a trembling hand I picked up the phone. The screen was black. I pressed the power button, nothing. It was dead. Completely drained, though it had been almost fully charged 5 minutes ago. A wave of icy fear washed over me, sweeping away all remaining rationality. This was not a hallucination. I forced myself to look at the photograph. And what I saw was worse than anything before. Thomas's fury was gone. Eleanor's pleading was gone. Now, all four faces wore the same expression, pure, unadulterated terror. They weren't looking at me. They were looking through me, at something behind my back. Their eyes were wide, their mouths open in a silent scream I couldn't hear. They could see her. Right now. I didn't dare turn around. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. The air in the room grew cold, heavy. It felt like I could reach out and touch the cold, as dense as icy water. I could hear my own ragged breathing and the frantic beating of my heart. And something else. A faint rustle, like the sound of a dress brushing against the floor. "What do you want?" I whispered into the emptiness. My lips barely obeyed me. There was no answer. But on the surface of the dark television screen, where her reflection had just been, a patch of condensation began to form. As if someone were breathing on the cold glass. And on that fogged surface, a single print slowly, scratchily appeared. The print of a small child's hand. I recoiled, my back hitting the wall, and I slid to the floor. I was trapped. She wasn't just following me. She was playing. She was enjoying my fear. I closed my eyes, trying to think. My mom said to return the photograph to the house. But how could I do that? I was sure that as soon as I left this room, she would do something. And then what? Put the photo on the mantel and hope she'd return to her prison? It seemed insane. Naive, idiotic madness. I looked at the picture again. My family in agony. They weren't just warning me. They were begging me to do something. I peered at Thomas's face. His finger was no longer pointing. His hand was pressed against the glass from the inside. And on that glass, on the thin layer of century-old dust, a scratch was visible. A single line that his ghostly nail must have drawn in a desperate attempt to communicate. He wasn't just shaking his head or pointing. He was trying to write. My heart pounding, I brought the photograph closer to the lamplight. Dust and grime made it hard to see, but there were definitely letters there. Faint, crooked, scratched from the other side. I wiped the glass with my sleeve, and I saw the word. One word that changed everything. Home. Not just to return it. I had to go home. Back to where it all began. To that very house. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an instruction. The only chance I had. Maybe they knew how to lock her back in. Maybe the answer was there. And I realized I had no choice. To stay here was to wait until she got tired of playing and made her move. I got to my feet, my legs feeling like cotton. Adrenaline gave me strength. I had to leave. Now. I grabbed my car keys and my bag, throwing the useless phone and the photograph inside. I walked to the door and moved the chair. I put my hand on the lock. And at that moment, there was a knock at the door. 3 distinct, loud knocks that echoed through the small room. I froze, the blood draining from my face. It couldn't be. She couldn't. Jake? Jake, it's me. Open the door. It wasn't a child's laugh. It was a woman's voice. A voice I knew all too well. Sarah. She had found me. She was standing on the other side of that door, and in the room with me was something that had just left its handprint on a television screen. I looked down at the photograph in my hand. The terror on my family's faces had been replaced by something new. Desperation. They were now looking not at me, but at the door. And in their gaze I read a plea that was clearer than any words. Don't let her in. Don't let her get to her. My brain short-circuited. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but where? The door was cut off. The window opened onto the second-floor parking lot, but I was paralyzed. Sarah's voice was an anchor to reality, pulling me in 2 opposite directions, toward salvation and toward doom. Jake, I know you're in there. Your mom called me, she was terribly worried. Said you left your grandmother's house, you sounded strange. I tracked your phone until it died. What's going on? Please talk to me. Her voice trembled with concern. She was scared for me. And I was scared for her. I looked at the photograph. At the faces of my ancestors. They were pleading with me. Great-grandmother Mary was shaking her head so desperately that her figure in the picture became a blur. I can't, Sarah. I forced out, my back pressed against the cold wall. My voice sounded foreign, hoarse and weak. Go away, please. I'm not okay. I've got some kind of stomach flu. I feel awful. It's contagious. The most idiotic lie I had ever told. Silence followed. I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. The icy chill in the room seemed to thicken around me. The flu? Jake, that doesn't sound like you. At least let me see you. I won't come in, just open the door for a second. No! I yelled, too loud, too sharp. I clutched the photograph's frame. The metal dug into my palm. Just leave. I'll come see you as soon as I feel better. I promise. Please, Sarah. I prayed she would listen. That love and common sense would make her leave. Silence again. And then I heard it. Behind her voice. A quiet, barely perceptible whisper, like the rustling of dry leaves. And this whisper formed words, mimicking Sarah's voice but with a mocking, icy intonation. "Let me in, Jake." It was her. Clara. She was at the door. With Sarah. "You know what, Jake?" Sarah's voice sounded hurt and cold. "Fine. I get it. You don't want to see me. I was just worried, but if you need your illness, have it your way. I'm leaving." I heard her footsteps retreating. Then the sound of a car engine starting and the squeal of tires on asphalt. She was gone. A wave of relief so overwhelming washed over me that my knees buckled, and I slid to the floor. I had saved her. I did it. I lay on the floor, clutching the photograph to my chest, trying to catch my breath. A minute passed. 2. Silence. The cold in the room began to recede slightly. Maybe she had gone after her? Maybe I was free? And then I heard another knock on the door. This time, not loud and demanding, but quiet, almost timid. A scratching sound. Like a small child tapping with their fingertips. My heart stopped. And then a voice came from behind the door. Sarah's voice. But different. Quiet, sweet, almost childlike. "Jake, I forgot my keys. Silly me. Can you open up?" I lifted my head. My eyes met the eyes in the photograph. They were no longer pleading. They were not desperate. Their faces were frozen in an expression of final, absolute defeat. My grandmother Eleanor covered her face with her hands again. Great-grandfather Jonathan simply closed his eyes. She hadn't gone after her. She had tricked me. She had taken her. Or worse, she had learned to perfectly imitate her voice. I didn't move. I just sat on the floor, staring at the door, listening to Sarah's sweet, fake voice ask again and again to be let in. It went on for what felt like an eternity. Then the voice fell silent. Complete silence descended. I didn't dare breathe. And then, under the door, in the thin strip of light from the hallway, I saw a small white piece of paper slide through. A folded sheet from a notepad. Shaking all over, I crawled to the door and picked it up. I unfolded it. On the sheet was a single word, written in a crooked, childish hand. Exactly like the one I'd seen scratched into the photograph. Home. She wasn't just haunting me. She was guiding me. She wanted me to go back. But why? I realized I had no choice. This room wasn't a fortress. It was a mousetrap. And I was the bait. I waited until dawn. There were no more sounds. When the first gray rays of light pierced through the cracks in the curtains, I yanked the door open. The hallway was empty. I ran to my car, expecting an attack at any second. Nothing. The drive back was torture. I drove on autopilot, my eyes glued to the rearview mirror. The photograph lay on the passenger seat. My family had changed again. Now they were looking forward, in the direction the car was moving. Their faces were grim, filled with a dark resolve. They were going home with me. And so here I am. I'm standing in front of the old Victorian house. It looks darker than I remember, the windows like empty eye sockets. Night has already fallen. I know she's inside. Waiting. The photograph in my hand feels warm. I have to go in. I don't know what's waiting for me, or if I'll survive. But I know this is the only way to end this nightmare. Or to become a part of it forever. Stepping across the threshold was the hardest thing I'd ever done. The air inside was still and cold, like a crypt. The door slammed shut behind me with a deafening boom that echoed through the house and died in the oppressive silence. I was trapped. The familiar smell of mothballs and cinnamon was gone. Now the house smelled only of dust and something else. A sickly sweet odor of wilted flowers and damp earth. The light from a street lamp barely penetrated the grimy windows, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to writhe and breathe in time with my ragged gasps. I pulled a small flashlight from my pocket. Its beam cut through the darkness of the entryway, revealing an old grandfather clock that had been silent for years, a mirror in a tarnished frame covered in a thick layer of filth. I avoided looking at my reflection. The photograph in my hand had changed again. The resolve on my ancestors' faces had been replaced by tense anticipation. They were all looking in the same direction, deeper into the house, toward the living room. Thomas, my unwilling guide from the past, had raised his hand and was pointing straight there. At the mantelpiece. The place where it all began. I walked slowly down the hall, my footsteps echoing dully in the silence. Every creaking floorboard sounded like a scream. Entering the living room, I felt the cold intensify. Here, it was almost tangible, clinging to my skin, seeping under my clothes. I aimed the flashlight beam at the fireplace. And froze. On the mantel, exactly where I had left the photograph, sat the rag doll. The one I'd found in the secret compartment. But now it wasn't alone. Arranged around it were small objects, like offerings on an altar. A dead bird with its neck twisted at an unnatural angle. Several yellowed human teeth. And a tarnished silver locket. I almost retched. I forced myself to move closer. Suddenly, a sound came from the depths of the house, from the staircase leading to the second floor. A quiet, mournful melody played by a music box. The tune was halting, as if the mechanism was broken, but I recognized it. It was a lullaby. I spun around, pointing the light at the staircase. The melody stopped. On the top steps sat a small figure. I could only see its silhouette against the window in the second-floor hallway. A girl in an old dress hugging her knees. "I knew you'd come back," her voice whispered. It wasn't loud, but it filled the entire room, seeming to penetrate my skull. "They knew, too. They always know everything." I remained silent, paralyzed by fear. "They didn't want to play with me," she continued, her voice full of a childish grievance that sounded monstrous in this setting. "They locked me away. Said I was bad. But you don't think I'm bad, do you, Jake?" The silhouette slowly stood up. "You let me out. And I want to thank you. I want to give you a gift." She began to descend the stairs. Step by step, unhurriedly. The creak of each step was a blow to my heart. I backed away, bumping into the mantelpiece. "I want to give you your family," Clara whispered, and as she took another step, moonlight fell on her face. It was pale as canvas, with dark voids for eyes. But the worst part was her smile. Wide, unnatural, filled with the same yellowed teeth that lay on the mantel. All of them. Together. She was only a few feet from me. I looked at the photograph in my hand. They were screaming. Their faces were contorted in a silent agony. And Thomas, he was no longer pointing at the mantel. He was desperately pointing at the silver locket next to the doll. I understood. It wasn't just an offering. It was a key. Without thinking, I grabbed the cold metal. Clara stopped. Her smile faltered. "Don't touch that," she hissed, her child's voice distorting with rage. I struggled to open the clasp. The locket sprang open. There was no portrait inside. Only a tiny, tightly folded slip of paper. With trembling fingers I unfolded it. On it were just 2 words, written in my great-grandmother Mary's calligraphic script. Her name. I didn't understand. What name? Clara? And then I heard a whisper. Not from the girl in front of me, but from everywhere at once. From the walls, the floor, the photograph itself. It was a chorus of my ancestors' voices. They were whispering the same word. A name I had never heard. A name the family had tried to forget. I looked up at the creature wearing Clara's face. And as the icy cold closed in around me, I spoke that name aloud. And in that moment, the entire house screamed. It wasn't a sound. It was a sensation. A vibration that shot up through the soles of my shoes, through the floor, through my bones, and exploded in my skull. The walls groaned like a living creature in agony. Plaster rained from the ceiling like snow. The window panes rattled and then fractured with a high-pitched shriek. The objects on the mantelpiece jumped. The dead bird and teeth scattered across the floor. The creature before me, the thing I had called Clara, staggered back. The childish face distorted, melting like wax in a fire. The illusion was gone. In its place was something indescribable. The figure remained the same, small and thin, but its skin had turned gray and was stretched tight like parchment. Its eyes became black, oily pits filled with a century of hatred. The smile stretched even wider, revealing not children's teeth, but sharp, needle-like shards. It let out a sound, an inhuman, piercing shriek of pain and fury that drowned out even the groans of the house. The light from my flashlight flickered and died, plunging the room into near-total darkness, broken only by the dim glow of the street lamp through the cracked windows. And then the photograph in my hand flared to life. Not with fire, but with a soft, golden light, like a sunset. It emanated from within, making the faded figures sharp and vibrant. Their desperation and fear were gone. On their faces was a grim, icy resolve. These were not victims. These were the jailers, back on duty. Thomas, standing on the left, raised his hand. His painted finger was now pointing not at an object, but at the monster. He looked directly at me, and in his gaze I read a command. "I know your name," I rasped, not recognizing my own voice. I repeated the name they had whispered to me, over and over. "I know who you are." Each time I said it, the creature flinched, and the golden light from the photograph grew brighter. It hissed and lunged at me, but not directly. The shadows in the room came alive, stretching into clawed hands that grabbed at my clothes, scratching my skin. The old couch overturned with a deafening crash. Books flew from the shelves at me like projectiles. The house was trying to tear me apart on her command. I dropped to my knees, covering my head with my arms. The photograph fell from my fingers and landed face up on the floor, its light flooding the carpet. The doll. A thought echoed in my mind. It wasn't my own voice. It was the whisper of Mary, my great-grandmother, quiet and insistent. "She is its anchor. Its door," added the stern voice of Jonathan. "Bring her home," roared Thomas. I understood. To lock her away, I had to connect her physical vessel, the doll, with her prison. I looked up. On the mantelpiece, among the debris, the rag doll still sat. It seemed to be the center of the hurricane, the only still object in the chaos. The creature began to take on Clara's form again, but this time distorted, broken. It reached a thin, gray hand toward me. "You can't," she hissed. "You belong to me. This house belongs to me. All of you belong to me." I had to get to the mantel. It was only a few feet away, but it felt like a mile. I scrambled forward, and the floorboards buckled under me like the deck of a sinking ship. I stumbled and fell, hitting my shoulder hard. I crawled. Shards of glass and plaster dug into my palms. Shadows whipped at my face. Objects flew around me, but I ignored them. My goal was the doll. I reached it. The fabric felt icy and vibrated with the malevolent energy trapped inside. Grabbing it, I turned and crawled back toward the glowing photograph on the floor. The creature let out another furious shriek and leaped. I saw it hurtling toward me, a whirlwind of gray cloth and black hatred. There was no time. I pressed the doll against the photograph, right onto the empty space where Clara had once stood. And the light exploded. The explosion was silent. A blinding flash of white light that consumed everything, shadows, sounds, smells. I felt not heat, but a monstrous cold that seemed to pull all the warmth, all the life out of me. And then, nothing. Just silence. When I was able to open my eyes, the first thing I saw was dust motes dancing slowly in a beam of morning sun slanting through a broken window. The room was in ruins. Furniture was overturned, the floor littered with shards and debris. But the chaos was static. Motionless. Quiet. The groaning of the house had stopped. The icy cold was gone, replaced by the normal morning chill of an old building. The sickly sweet smell of decay had vanished too, leaving only the scent of dust and old wood. I was lying on the floor, bruised and battered, but alive. I sat up, my body screaming with pain in every muscle. I looked at my hands. They were covered in scratches and scrapes, but they were empty. The doll was gone. My gaze shot to where the photograph had been. It was there. Face up, in its heavy brass frame. The golden glow was gone. It was just an old, faded picture. Shaking, I got to my feet and walked closer. I bent down and picked it up. They were all together again. 5 figures, frozen in time. But everything was different. They had returned to their original poses, but their expressions had changed. Jonathan's severity had softened into an endless, heavy weariness. Mary's sadness was deeper, but now held a kind of peace. My little grandmother Eleanor no longer looked scared. She just seemed small and lonely. And Thomas, his vicious smirk was gone. In its place was a grim, unyielding resolve. He stared straight ahead, like a soldier at a post he would never leave. And between them, once again, stood Clara. Or what was left of her. She was in her place, but the image was distorted, blurry, as if she were being sucked back into the paper. Her face was blank again, but now it was a different kind of blankness. Not sinister, but final. She was locked away. Forever. And in her painted hand she once again held the rag doll. The anchor that held her in place. The family was whole again. The prison was restored. I slowly placed the photograph back on the broken mantelpiece. It belonged in this house. It was a part of it. I couldn't destroy it. That would mean setting her free again. And I couldn't take it with me. This was not my burden to carry. I turned and, without looking back, walked toward the exit. I didn't clean anything up. I just left. I stepped outside, and the fresh morning air had never felt so sweet. I don't know what I'll do next. How will I explain to Sarah, to my mom, to anyone, what happened? I probably won't. They would never believe me. I can barely believe it myself. I only know one thing. I will never return to that house. I will leave it to its shadows and memories. Let my ancestors keep their silent watch. They paid their price, and now I understand that it was the price of protecting us all. Thank you to everyone who read and believed me. I don't know if this can be called an ending, or if it's just 100-year reprieve. But for me, it's over. I have to try to move on. If I can. A month has passed. A month that felt like a lifetime and like one long, blurry moment. I thought the phrase, "try to move on," meant you just live. You go to work, you eat, you sleep. But it doesn't. It means constantly fighting the echo. The echo of creaking floorboards, of a child's laughter, of a silent scream from an old photograph. I'm back in my apartment. It feels alien, too quiet, too modern. I wake up at night at the slightest rustle, my heart pounding, the taste of dust and decay on my tongue. I flinch when I see old photos in magazines or on friends' walls. Nightmares are my constant companions. In them, I'm back in that house, again and again. But this time I can't leave, and the faces in the photograph are blank, as if they've abandoned me. Things with Sarah are complicated. I tried to explain. Of course, I didn't tell her everything. I said that with my grandmother's death and being alone in the old house, I had a serious nervous breakdown. That I was hallucinating, that I thought I was being followed. The stomach flu story at the motel was a panicked lie. She listens, nods, says she understands. But I see the doubt in her eyes. She looks at me as if I'm made of thin glass and might shatter at any moment. A wall has grown between us, and I don't know how to break it down without admitting to a madness she would never accept. I deleted everything related to that house from my phone. The video from the living room, the photos I took. Everything except one. The very first one. The one I sent to my mom from the attic. I don't know why I kept it. As a reminder, maybe. As a scar. Today, I decided it had to end. I had to delete it too. To free up space, both on my phone and in my head. I opened my gallery. There it was. 5 figures frozen in time, before it all began. Before I disturbed their peace. I looked at them, and the memories flooded back. The coldness of the frame, the smell of damp earth from the doll, the piercing shriek at the end. My finger hovered over the delete button. Just one tap, and it would all be over. But I couldn't. Instead, just like the first time, I zoomed in on the image to see their faces. The faces of my jailers. I studied their frozen poses, which I remembered from the final moments in that house. A weary Jonathan. A peaceful Mary. A lonely Eleanor. A distorted, trapped Clara. And then I saw it. Thomas. On the day I left, his face had expressed a grim resolve. He was staring straight ahead, like a guard. In this photograph, on my phone, he was different. His head was turned ever so slightly. Just a fraction of an inch. But it was enough. He was no longer looking straight ahead. He was looking at me. An icy grip seized my heart. It couldn't be. It's just a digital copy. Pixel distortion. A trick of the light on the screen. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, looked again. No. There was no mistaking it. His eyes, two dark spots on the old picture, were fixed directly on me. There was no hatred or malice in his gaze. There was a warning and an accusation. "You're not done yet," his pixelated eyes seemed to say. With trembling hands, I dropped the phone on the table. This can't be happening. I locked her up. We locked her up. The story is over. And at that moment, my phone rang. I jumped as if I'd been struck. "Mom" was on the screen. I swallowed the lump in my throat and answered. "Jake?" My mom's voice was tense, filled with panic. "Mom? What happened? Are you okay? Jake, you need to come. Immediately." "What? Where? What's going on?" "The house, your grandmother's house," she breathed out, and I heard a sob on the other end. "The neighbors called. Mr. Henderson. He says for the past few nights, he's seen a light in the windows. And oh God, Jake." "And what, Mom? Tell me." "He says he sees a little girl. She stands at a window on the second floor and looks out at the street. She's waving at him." I hung up. I didn't say goodbye, not a word. I just hit the end call button. The room around me narrowed to a single point, the phone screen lying on the table. The photograph was still open. And Thomas was still looking at me. Now, there was something else in his gaze. A grim, almost gloating satisfaction. "I told you so." His pixelated eyes screamed. The end. What a fool I was to believe it. There are no easy endings to stories like this. I hadn't won. I had just run away, leaving my ancestors to keep their eternal watch while the enemy they contained found another loophole. A loophole I had created myself. The digital copy. A perfect, soulless replica that I had been carrying in my pocket for a month. I thought I had locked her in the house, but in reality, I had given her a key to the entire world. Panic, cold and sharp as a shard of glass, pierced my chest. I grabbed the phone, my finger flying to the delete button. No. Too easy. If destroying the copy solved the problem, Thomas wouldn't be looking at me like that. He would look pleading. This was a trap. What would happen if I deleted this image? Would she be freed from this anchor just as she was freed from the physical one when I found the doll? Would she then become a free entity, bound only to me? I looked at the image again, zooming in as far as I could. The picture trembled in my hands. The others had changed, too. The weariness on Jonathan's face had turned to rage. He wasn't looking at me, but at Clara, his lips pressed into a thin, furious line. Great-grandmother Mary no longer looked peaceful. She was pressing her hands to her mouth in terror, her eyes wide. And my little grandmother Eleanor, she was crying. Real, wet, digital tears that streamed down her cheek, distorting the pixels. They weren't just warning me. They were fighting again. Right there, in my phone. And they were losing. Because Clara had changed, too. She was no longer a blurry, distorted smudge. She was becoming clearer. Her features were emerging with every second. And she was no longer staring into nothingness. She was looking up at Thomas, and on her face, slowly, agonizingly, that same empty, malevolent smile was blooming. I had to go. This time, the drive was different. There was no panicked flight or grim determination. There was only a cold, heavy emptiness in my stomach. I didn't turn off the phone. I placed it on the passenger seat, screen up. My digital companion. My sin. I drove and watched as they changed. As the struggle unfolded in a tiny universe of light and code. It was already dark when I got to the house. The street was quiet, almost deserted. But unlike last time, the house didn't look dark and abandoned. On the contrary. Lights were on in every window, a warm, yellow, inviting glow that beckoned, promising warmth and safety. It was disgusting. Fake. Like a predator pretending to be harmless. A silhouette stood by the neighbor's fence. Mr. Henderson. He saw my car and hobbled toward me, his old face pale and worn in the headlights. Jake? Thank God, he rasped, grabbing my car door. Your mother said you were coming. I was about to call the police again. Again? I called them 2 days ago, he said, waving a trembling hand toward the house. Told them about the lights, about the girl. They came, walked around the house. Everything was locked up, dark as a tomb. They looked at me like I was a crazy old man. But as soon as they left, the lights came on again. And she was there. In the window of her old bedroom. Smiling at me. My blood ran cold. Did she do anything? Besides just stand there and watch? Mr. Henderson swallowed hard. Last night, she put her palm against the glass. And then, a handprint appeared on the glass. But not on her side. On my side. On the outside. I closed my eyes. She was getting stronger. She could already affect the physical world beyond the house. Don't go in there, son, the old man whispered. Whatever's in there, it's waiting for you. I know, I replied quietly. But I have to. I got out of the car, leaving the door open. The phone in my hand felt red-hot. I walked to the front door. It wasn't locked. It was slightly ajar, inviting me in. I stepped over the threshold. Inside, everything was perfect. No dust, no mess. Everything was in its place, clean, polished. Like a house from a 1950s magazine. From the partially open living room door, I could hear music, the same lullaby from the music box. But now it sounded gentle and pure, without a single false note. And it smelled like apple pie. I entered the living room. On the mantelpiece stood the photograph. The physical one. But it had changed beyond recognition. It was no longer a faded sepia print. It was now in color. Bright, vibrant, as if taken yesterday. Jonathan's suit was dark blue, Mary's dress was lavender. And their faces, they were almost alive. Frozen, but alive. And on them was written in indescribable horror. They looked at me as if from behind the thick glass of an aquarium, silently begging for help. Their prison had become brighter, but all the more secure for it. And then I looked at Clara's spot. She was smiling. A wide, happy smile, like any normal child in a family portrait. I looked down at my phone. The image on it had changed too. The entire family, Mary, Jonathan, Eleanor, Thomas, was huddled in the left corner of the digital picture, pushed to the very edge. And the rest of the space was taken up by Clara. She stood in the center, and she was no longer a girl. She was that same gray, parchment-like creature I had seen that night. And she was looking at me. I understood her plan. She wasn't trying to escape. She was trying to switch places. She wanted to lock them all in the digital world, in the copy I carried with me. And to completely take over the original herself. The physical photograph, the house, reality. And she was close. I had to destroy one of the anchors. But which one? The physical one? Or the digital one? Destroy the original, and she might remain in the digital world, free to travel the network. Destroy the copy, and maybe she would fully return to the original, but become even stronger. I stood in the middle of the perfect, apple pie-scented living room, holding 2 windows to hell. One from the past, the other from the present. And then I heard a sound from upstairs. Not footsteps. Not laughter. I heard the Windows startup sound. And then, the quiet, distinct click of a webcam turning on. The click of the webcam sounded louder than a gunshot in the perfect silence of the house. I froze, my eyes darting from the phone in my hand to the staircase leading into the darkness of the second floor. She was using my laptop. My own weapon, which I had so naively set up for proof. She was learning. She was evolving. I slowly started up the stairs. With each step, the house's perfect illusion began to falter. The smell of apple pie mingled with the nauseating sweetness of rot. The perfectly clean wallpaper seemed to bloom with dark, damp stains at the edges of my vision. The gentle lullaby distorted, slowed down, turning into a funeral march. The door to my grandmother's bedroom was open. My old laptop sat on the desk, its screen glowing brightly in the dimness. I walked in. The webcam feed was on the screen. I saw myself, standing in the doorway, phone in hand. But the room on the screen was different. It wasn't a clean, cozy bedroom, but the chaotic, ruined battlefield I had left behind. And on the screen, standing behind me, was her. The gray, parchment-like figure with black holes for eyes. She was broadcasting herself from the phone through the laptop, creating a bridge between the digital and physical worlds. A text box appeared on the screen, letters typing themselves out, slowly, as if by a child. "Hello, Jake. Want to join them? There's room for one more." I looked at my phone. My family, huddled in the corner of the screen, looked at me with pleading eyes. They were trapped. Then I looked at the color photograph downstairs, on the mantel. A smiling Clara. Her prison had become her kingdom. And I realized that destroying just one meant losing. If I destroyed the phone, my family would be gone forever, and she might only grow stronger in the original. If I destroyed the original, they would remain in a digital hell, and she, free from a physical anchor, could go anywhere. The solution came to me on its own. Desperate, insane, but the only right one. I wasn't supposed to destroy. I was supposed to merge. To force the virus back into the source file. I raised my phone and aimed its camera at the laptop screen. An infinity appeared on the screen. Me, filming the screen, which showed me filming the screen, and so on. A feedback loop, a digital hall of mirrors. The image on the laptop flickered, filled with static. The creature behind me on the screen twitched, as if shocked. The paradox was hurting it. Letters appeared on the screen again, this time hurried, panicked. "No. Stop." I didn't stop. Keeping the phone aimed at the screen, I ran out of the room and down the stairs. The house's illusion collapsed completely. The walls around me were covered in black mold, the air turned to ice. I snatched the bright, color photograph from the mantelpiece. She screamed. Not from the laptop, but from both images at once. A piercing shriek composed of digital noise and otherworldly fury. I placed the original on the floor, color side up. And with all my strength, I pressed the phone against it, screen to screen. The digital prison lay upon the physical one. The copy upon the original. For a moment, everything froze. The bright screen of the phone shone through the old paper, superimposing one image on the other. My family's horror mixed with their own horror. The gray figure of Clara overlaid her own smiling face. And then I lifted the heavy brass frame and brought it crashing down on this monstrous sandwich. There was a deafening crack of glass and crunch of plastic. I struck again. And again. Until all that was left beneath my blows was a pile of shards and twisted metal. And then the light went out. There was no explosion, no flash. Just all the light in the house, the fake light from the lamps, the light from the screen, vanished. I was plunged into absolute, primal darkness. And silence. All the energy, all the horror, all the pain, it was all gone. I knelt in the total darkness, breathing heavily. Minutes passed before my eyes adjusted, and I could make out the faint light of the street lamp filtering through the broken window. The house was in ruins again. But now it was just an old, ruined house. Not evil. Just empty. On the floor, among the shards of glass from the frame and the phone screen, lay a scrap of paper. The original photograph. I picked it up with trembling hands. It was blank. No figures. No faces. Nothing. Just a yellowed, cracked rectangle of photo paper. The prison had been destroyed. But with it, the jailers and the prisoner had vanished too. They were all gone. Forever. I don't know where. Did they dissolve into nothingness? Or did that final blow send them all together to some other place, beyond paper and wires? I'll never know. I left the empty photograph there on the floor, among the wreckage of my mistake. I walked out of the house, and for the first time in a month, I felt like I could breathe. I was free. But freedom has a price. Now, I am the last one. The only one who remembers their faces, their fear, and their sacrifice. I don't see them in photographs anymore. But sometimes, when I look at the dark screen of a turned-off television, or at static on a monitor, I think I see movement. A vague silhouette. A face in the digital noise. And I understand that they are not completely gone. A piece of their nightmare will forever remain in this world. And I am its keeper.